The word cult is just a clipped version of culture, and that's worth sitting with. Because once you're steeped in a culture of obedience to doctrine, groupthink, and psychological manipulation, the line between a tight-knit group and something far more dangerous gets razor thin. Most cults don't start with poison Kool-Aid. They start with belonging. Some of the most trusted institutions, schools, churches, even clubs, can tick more cult boxes than we care to admit. When that culture demands obedience, manipulates emotion, and punishes dissent, the line between belonging and brainwashing blurs. Dangerous cults don't always wear robes. Sometimes they wear Letterman jackets. At first glance, the Lords of Chaos might look like just another gang. High school boys in Fort Myers, Florida, chasing power and notoriety through a string of escalating crimes. But they weren't just seeking street cred. They straddled the razor-thin line between gang and cult, driven by a warped ideology and the magnetic pull of a charismatic leader. This wasn't just rebellion, it was radicalization dressed in teenage bravado. And that charismatic leader, he didn't stumble into followers, he curated them. He sought out the outcasts, the loners, the boys with missing or broken father figures, the ones invisible to most adults, the ones that no one warned their kids to stay away from because they didn't look like trouble. These weren't your stereotypical troublemakers, they were smart, artistic. Some played in the school band, others were in the math club. Intellectually sharp, but emotionally frayed. And that's what cult leaders do. They bypass the brain and speak to the ache. They offer belonging, purpose, and healing from the quiet misery of being a misfit. And once someone sees you and promises to fix what's broken, it's easy to fall under their spell. This is the story of how a group of high school kids became vandals, thieves, arsonists, and eventually killers. It started with a spark, a craving for clout, a need to feel powerful and to be feared. But once ignited, that fire spread fast, and what began as petty crime became a full-blown inferno of destruction. It was their hunger to be feared that ultimately undid them. And at the center of the blaze stood Kevin Foster, a boy with a gasoline grin and a book of matches for a soul. His words were accelerants. His charisma was combustible. He gathered his crew like kindling. Lonely boys, misfits, smart kids too weird or too wounded to belong. They weren't the kinds of kids you'd warn your daughter about. They were the quiet ones, the clever ones, the band geeks, and the math elites. Because cult leaders don't need muscle when they can bend minds. Kevin lit the match and convinced others to follow him into the flames. And even after he was locked away, Kevin's fire kept burning. He wasn't done collecting disciples, and his ideology still smoldered. And what he did from behind prison walls may be even more shocking than the crimes that put him there. Because this isn't just a story about fire, it's a warning. In a world where rejecting the status quo makes you a pariah, where loneliness festers and delusion spreads like gasoline on pavement, charismatic leaders can flourish. Not all cults wear robes or chant mantras. Some preach conspiracy, some promise salvation, and some thrive on chaos. Someone has to die tonight. That phrase wasn't shouted, it was just a statement, perhaps even whispered like a breeze through dry brush. And once spoken, it caught, it spread, it consumed. This is the story of a group of boys who didn't just play with fire, they became it. This is the story of the Lords of Chaos and their reign of terror in Florida on Crime to Burn. Welcome to Crime to Burn, where we explore the dark city landscape where true crime intersects with arson and criminal negligence. Join us as we sift through the ashes to bring you the story of what really happened. Welcome back to Crime to Burn. I'm April, a fire protection engineer and former firefighter.
And I'm Johnny Backdraft, lighting up the past one smoky whisper at a time. And if you smell something, that's just the truth sneaking out the back.
It made it sound like the truth was a fart.
It's supposed to.
If you're not already engaging with our stuff, now's a great time to jump in. We are on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, X, and Facebook, bringing you a mix of fire facts and unhinged chaos. Like, share, comment, duet, holler into the void. Every little bit helps us grow. And if we're ever going to pay off this podcast gear we bought, we're going to need a bigger audience. Shout out to all of our new Podbean followers. We see you and we love you. And hey, if you usually listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or Good Pods, it helps immensely if you follow us there too. Ratings and reviews on each platform are basically love letters in algorithmic format. Drop us a comment on individual episodes if your app allows it. Tell us what you'd name your cult if you started one. Ours would probably involve naps and normalizing mismatched socks. Those 5-star ratings, they're pure gold, and we appreciate every single one. Also, we have seen such incredible growth on Podbean over the last couple of months, and if any of our new listeners also happen to have Spotify or Apple Podcasts, would you do us a huge favor and follow us on those apps and give us ratings there as well? It would be so incredibly helpful, because while we are growing hand over fist on Podbean, our growth on Apple Podcasts and Spotify has been just ho-humming along. But with your help, we can tell the algorithm in those platforms that we're interesting and our listeners are engaged, and that would be really helpful. As always, got a fire story, a case suggestion, a tale of your worst fire safety decision? We promise we won't judge much. Drop us an email at crimetoburn@gmail.com. We want to hear from you. And finally, tell your friends. Or if you prefer the strong, silent type of support, you can wear our merch and let the t-shirts do the talking. Our spread shop link is in the show notes. Thanks for being part of this little arson-obsessed corner of the internet. There's also another way that you can support the show if you are in the market for a dog containment system. As you're all likely well aware, we do have a dog, Winston, and we desperately love Winston, but Winston is high energy and low impulse control.
And he's just one backyard away from a misdemeanor.
And we were desperate to find a containment system to keep him in our yard but allow him to run free to work off some of that hound dog energy. So after several failed attempts to use GPS and satellite collars from other brands, we purchased the Paulius wireless dog fence. No wires, no digging, no drama. It gives him the freedom to run.
Without turning the neighbor's garden into a crime scene.
Just sweet, invisible boundaries. Because Winston doesn't need a rap sheet.
Just a radius.
We've been so happy with the Paulius system that we contacted them and asked if we could be an affiliate, and they agreed. So if you're looking for a concern-free canine containment contraption to save your sanity, visit www.paulius.com. That's P-A-W-I-O-U-S. And if you use the code CRIME2BURN at checkout, you will get 10% off your purchase. Or you can find the affiliate link in our show notes. For each purchase made using the code CRIME2BURN, we will receive a small commission. But seriously, it's the first system we found that truly works to keep Winston happily hanging at home.
Instead of being the neighborhood's hooligan hound.
So zoomy right on over to www.paulius.com and remember to use the code CRIME2BURN at checkout. Today we are kicking off a new series, Obedience to Ashes, Cults, Chaos, and Criminal Fires. Yes, there's arson, so it is firmly in our wheelhouse, but the heart of this case isn't just about fire. It's about how a charismatic teenage mastermind recruited a band of bright, talented boys and led them down a path of destruction. We're not talking about kids on the fringes. These were gifted students. Some of them were mathletes and band geeks, the kind of boys that no one saw coming until it was too late. So we're starting in April of 1996. High school band director Mark Schwebees had just wrapped an ordinary evening when there was a knock at his door. A very late knock. Unusual. He opened the door to find one of his students standing there, but before Mark could say a word, the student took off running. Mark stepped out onto the porch, confused. That's when the shotgun fired. The first blast struck him in the head. The second, fired after he was already falling, hit him in the buttocks. He was dead before he hit the pavement. Moments later, 911 calls flooded dispatch. We heard shots. Someone's been shot. Come quick. By the time the emergency crews arrived, there was nothing left to save. The crime scene was chaos. Witnesses all gave conflicting accounts. Was there one car, a truck, two, one shooter, a group of people? The neighborhood was shaken, and no one seemed to have any useful answers. And then there was Mark's car. It contained what seemed like random junk. A fire extinguisher, a few cans of peaches, and some staplers. Officers dismissed this as irrelevant. Leftovers from work or school clutter. But those items, strange as they were the motive. And if you can't imagine how canned fruit, fire safety gear, and office supplies could lead to murder, well, neither could the police. Not at first. But when one thread in a tangled web of violence and lies finally began to unravel, the staplers, the extinguisher, and the peaches came into focus. And behind them, a teenage cult with a thirst for chaos, led by a boy who believed fear was power, and fire was the path to glory. Kevin Foster was a boy on the cusp of manhood, brilliant, magnetic, and deeply unsettling. People who knew him use a lot of words to describe him, but a few rise above the rest. Charismatic genius. He was the kind of smart that made school feel like a prison, where he'd spend more time sowing seeds of chaos than focusing on learning. His classmates took to calling him psycho, so he stopped going. Not because he couldn't hack it, but because he just couldn't be bothered. To the adults in his life, Kevin appeared shockingly well-adjusted, polite, quick-witted, even charming. But his life was a cocktail of chaos, shaken right from the start. He had an older sister, Kelly, from his mother's first marriage. His own father, her second husband, abandoned them when Kevin was still an infant. Then came husband number 3, Brian Burns, who didn't exactly disappear after he divorced Kevin's mother. Instead, he lingered in their lives, still entangled in the family dynamic. Eventually, Kevin's mother married a long-haul trucker named John Foster. John didn't just tolerate the baggage, he unpacked and stayed. He accepted Ruby's past, Brian's continuing presence despite his divorce from Ruby, and he accepted Kevin as his own, adopting him and giving him the name Foster. From the outside, it might have looked like stability, but Kevin's world was built on emotional quicksand. 2 stepfathers with a tendency for volatile outbursts living in one house, a mother that kept 2 driver's licenses, one with the last name Burns and one with the last name Foster. Ruby Foster, determined to be nothing like her own strict Catholic parents, set out to be the kind of mother she wished she'd had. A friend first, a parent second. Boundaries blurred. She shared intimate details of her sex life with Kevin and invited him to do the same.
Ew.
To his friends, she was the cool mom, the one with snacks and sodas and the open door policy, the house everyone wanted to hang out at. But behind the open doors was a locked vault of dysfunction. To his closest friends, Kevin revealed the darkness at home, explosive arguments, physical abuse, and a volatile environment where even his mother's affection came laced with manipulation. The abuse, he said, came not just from his stepfathers, but from Ruby also. Behind the redneck wild child persona Kevin showed the world, there was a storm of emotional turmoil he kept buried. When a girlfriend allegedly started seeing one of his closest friends behind his back, Kevin didn't spiral, he detonated. He claimed it was an accident, that he'd been trying to uncock a revolver and the hammer slipped. But the truth was perhaps harder to swallow. It appeared Kevin shot himself, in the abdomen. People who knew him weren't convinced by the accident story. Kevin's family owned a pawn shop, and he'd been handling firearms since he was just a boy. He was intimately familiar with them. No one with that kind of experience would try to lower a revolver hammer with the barrel pointed into their gut. But Kevin survived. He underwent multiple surgeries and a long hospital stay, and when it was over, his mother pulled him out of high school. Kevin Foster officially became a dropout. But
That's technically a pullout.
Right. But Kevin still had dreams. He said he wanted to be an architect, so he got his GED and enrolled in college courses. Just as quickly, he dropped out. College bored him too. But Jack Daniels didn't, neither did smoking, vandalism, and setting small fires for fun. The boy who once talked about designing buildings was growing more interested in watching them burn. Kevin might have faded into the background, just another high school dropout working at the family pawn shop, passing the time in his garage rec room, drinking Jack, smoking cigarettes, and entertaining his friends. A life of southern monotony, maybe. But that was never Kevin's style. He was a thrill seeker, a collector of guns, of knives, of chaos. But most of all, people. Kevin didn't just want drinking buddies, he wanted disciples. Carefully curated friends who admired him, feared him, and followed him. While others his age were prepping college applications, Kevin was building something else, a criminal resume, a dangerous reputation, and a band of boys who treated his every word like gospel. And the gospel of Kevin didn't arrive all at once. It seeped in slowly like gasoline into soil and drips and drabs through anarchist and supremacist pamphlets left behind by fringe groups who trafficked through his parents' pawn shop, through whispered conversations and handshakes at gun shows where he forged connections with others who fed off violence and radical ideologies.
Can I get a copy of that?
I'll see what I can do.
The Gospel of Kevin?
Actually, I do have his manifesto. We're going to talk about it.
Boy.
Part of his childhood had been spent in the panhandle of Texas, where family ties allegedly stretched into the underworld, organizations that operated in the shadows with whispers of connections to organized crime. Violence wasn't foreign in Kevin's family tree. His mother's sister had been murdered by her husband. Kevin, in a moment of bravado, claimed he killed the uncle in revenge, a boast most likely false, but potent enough to impress the misfits he surrounded himself with. By 1995, Kevin was pushing into adulthood with a warped identity, anarchist, gun enthusiast, and wounded son tangled in a codependent web with his mother and 2 volatile stepfathers. He nurtured violent fantasies and collected lonely, impressionable boys the way others might collect baseball cards. And with each one he recruited, his delusions grew teeth. Chris Burnett had dropped out of high school for disciplinary issues. He and Kevin liked the same hangout, a waterfront bar called Marina 31. But their friendship seemed to have started with something more teenage and more volatile, a mutual crush on the same girl. For a while, the three of them were inseparable, until the competition got old and she blew them both off. Whatever tension lingered between them was quickly overshadowed by something deeper, a shared disregard for little things like ownership. When Kevin needed a new motor for his truck, Chris didn't just offer help, he helped him steal one. Together, they boosted a truck, ripped out the engine, and torched the rest to cover their tracks. The truck even belonged to a guy they knew, just barely, a casual acquaintance. That motor ended up not working, so they had to do it again. Another truck, another engine, another fire. Kevin's truck by the end of it was less of a vehicle and more of a Frankenstein's monster stitched together with stolen parts and held together by mutual ambition and a complete lack of impulse control. While Chris Burnett's friendship with Kevin was built on shared disregard for the law, Pete Magnotti's connection to Kevin was something closer to hero worship. He met Kevin back in 7th grade. The two bonded over a shared affinity for math. They were both mathletes, as it were. But where Kevin was the rough-edged redneck kid, other students found amusing, and at times, frightening enough to nickname Psycho. Pete was drawn to Kevin for another reason: protection. Pete was half Filipino, small for his age, and carried himself with an effeminate softness that made him a target. He loved comic books, he was a computer geek, and although his father was present in his life, the relationship was strained and dysfunctional. Pete wanted for nothing materially, but emotionally he was vulnerable, and Kevin offered him the kind of shield he craved. When Kevin began sticking up for him and treating him like a kid brother, Pete's admiration quickly hardened into loyalty.
Dude, you got so many boner jokes in here.
When they were...
Are you doing this to me on purpose?
His father hated Kevin, understood something about him intuitively, and eventually forbade his son from seeing him. But Pete, spoiled in material things and unused to resistance, simply insisted that his parents buy him a car. And once Pete had wheels, keeping him away from Kevin Foster was like trying to keep a moth from a flame.
You need those spikes that go down the road when you run over them one way, but not the other way. That's how you do it.
While Pete's car was a gift from his parents, he was still responsible for the insurance payments, so he got a job at Hardee's. And that's where he met another high schooler, Chris Black. And just for clarity, since we've now got two Chris's in the story, we'll refer to Chris Burnett as Burnett and Chris Black simply as Chris. Pete's hero worship of Kevin Foster seemed to seep into every corner of his personality, so it wasn't long before he started telling his new coworker about his big bad buddy with guns and a fearless streak. The stories were intriguing to someone like Chris. Chris was a self-described chunk and computer geek, ridiculed for his weight, his fascination with anime and sci-fi, his childishness, and for being in the gifted program. He looked at Pete and saw a mirror, the same insecurities, the same interests, but Pete had something Chris didn't. Pete had a protector, a friend, some might even say, an obsession. Whatever Pete told Chris about Kevin Foster, it worked. There was something magnetic about it, something that pulled Chris into Kevin's orbit. And Kevin, he was more than happy to welcome him in. Because Kevin Foster didn't just want friends, he wanted followers. He wanted a militia, and he was more than willing to build it out of broken boys no one else saw coming. But Kevin Foster didn't always dream of building a militia. He was a boy, a high school dropout, sure, but a boy.
This kid was part of the GATE program, so he's recruited basically a CIA operative that hasn't been activated yet.
There you go. He had crushes on girls, he was obsessed with guns, yes, and tangled in a family tree with too many branches and not enough harmony. But for a while, he came off as charming, charismatic, and even well-adjusted. Until he wasn't. The turning point seemed to come after he suffered that potentially self-inflicted gunshot wound. While he was confined to a hospital bed, one of his closest friends, just a kid, lost their battle with terminal cancer. People who knew Kevin noted that something twisted in him around that time. It was like a switch flipped, like the world had revealed its cruelty too clearly to a boy too young. The guilt, the anger, the helplessness, it all seemed to take root. And as Kevin grappled with his friend's death, with the fading dream of college and a career in architecture, a dream he just couldn't follow through on because he just couldn't hack the classes, something inside him hardened. He didn't explode, he seethed. And in that simmering anger, in the disappointment and grief and the crumbling ego, the darker thoughts began to grow. Thoughts he once might have buried. They started to take shape, and no one close to him, seemed to see it coming. Because Kevin Foster had been wearing the mask of a well-adjusted young man, but underneath he was already unraveling. And as Kevin unraveled, that mask began to slip. He let it drop more often around friends, around the few people who had once been drawn to his charm, and most of them started to pull away. But not all of them, some of them stayed. Burnett, for one, tied to Kevin by shared secrets and acts that couldn't be undone, and Pete, always Pete. Pete didn't flinch at the darkness Kevin showed him, because Pete had a darkness of his own. In his writing and his artwork, Pete vented violent fantasies, dark visions of a world he clearly felt had wronged him. Kevin's thoughts, no matter how disturbing, didn't scare Pete, they resonated. The two of them seemed sewn from the same twisted thread, one that wanted to strike back, one that believed punishment was owed to a cruel and indifferent world. Together, they didn't just feed each other's fantasies, they gave those fantasies permission to grow. Chris Black was already smitten with Kevin's outlaw charm when Pete finally introduced them, Halloween night 1995. That marked the real first test. Kevin set up a scavenger hunt, his twisted version of a hazing ritual. The rules were simple: steal, vandalize, impress. It wasn't really about winning, it was about proving who had the spine to follow him deeper into the shadows when the stakes got real. Chris Black passed. He dove headfirst into Kevin's chaos because it offered something he'd never had: acceptance. He'd spent his life falling short in his father's world of rifles, fishing poles, and blue-collar expectations. But in Kevin, the redneck rebel with a god complex, Chris found a twisted surrogate, someone who saw value in him, not in spite of his oddities, but because of them. And then there was Derek Shields. He'd been friends with Chris Black since elementary school, and in high school he found himself locked in an unspoken academic rivalry with Kevin Foster, two sharp minds circling the same orbit, silently jockeying for top marks. That academic tension dissolved when Kevin's high school career ended with a gunshot wound and a dropout notice. But Derek's friendship with Chris soon pulled him even deeper into Kevin's gravitational field. Derek wasn't a chaos junkie, he was a band kid, quiet, focused, and driven. He didn't need crime to feel alive, but he did need something. His father was absent after his parents' divorce, but Derek had always had his big brother Fred, until the night Fred was found unconscious in the road with a catastrophic head injury. For weeks, Derek sat vigil in a hospital chair watching Fred slip further from existence. The police didn't seem particularly interested in solving what had happened. They tossed out theories: horseplay, maybe car surfing, but the toxicology reports showed that Fred wasn't high as the police had alleged. But Derek heard whispers, rumors, that this wasn't an accident, that someone had done this. And revenge, that's not the kind of thing you can pull off alone. You need backup, a crew, all things Kevin Foster was offering. And finally there was Tom Tyrone, a friend of Burnett's pulled into Kevin's orbit by association alone. Tom was the youngest of 8 kids, popular but goofy and aimless. He already had a taste for reckless rebellion and the thrill of towing the line. He had always been a follower, so when Kevin came calling, it didn't take long for Tom to fall in step with the growing pack of misfits Kevin was assembling. But Kevin didn't see his crew as friends, he didn't even see them as equals. When Kevin looked at them, he saw vulnerabilities to exploit and skills to leverage, because Kevin had plans, dark, dangerous plans, and he was gathering the tools to carry them out. And while Kevin might have fancied himself a mastermind, at the end of the day, he was still a kid. His stepdad had finally moved out as tensions in the home escalated, but the absence of conflict didn't do anything to calm the storm brewing inside him. By March of 1996, Kevin's bravado was escalating. Bigger risks, bolder crimes, and with every reckless act that didn't land him in jail, his delusions of grandeur and invincibility only grew stronger. But teenage anarchist or not, Kevin still had to answer to his mother. When she left town to visit relatives, she made one thing clear: he was not to drive his sister's car. His license had been suspended, and she didn't really trust him to follow the rules. And she was right not to. Kevin did exactly what he was told not to do, and when he dented the fender, he needed a plan, fast. He tried, unsuccessfully, to steal a replacement fender from parked cars, but time was running out, so in true Kevin Foster fashion, he took it a step further. He broke into a police lot and stole the fender off of a marked police car. Then he took it home, stripped off the lettering, repainted it, and installed it, hiding the evidence and dodging his mother's wrath.
Respect.
What Kevin lacked in regard for rules, he more than made up for in sheer ballsiness. Breaking into a police garage to strip a cruiser for parts, that wasn't a lapse in judgment, that was a calculated, gutsy move fueled by arrogance and the unshakable belief that he was untouchable. It wasn't just about fixing the fender, it was about proving to himself and maybe to the world that he could outmaneuver anyone, even the cops. By the end of March, Kevin, Burnett, and Tom were done playing small time. Petty theft and isolated arson weren't cutting it anymore. Kevin didn't just want chaos, he wanted attention, admiration, and a little infamy. So the trio broke into the local car lot and stole a brand new Jeep. And then, just to prove they could, they went back the very next night and stole another. It was risky, reckless, and bold, but Kevin had a plan to keep the cops distracted. He rigged up a soda can with brake powder, something that supposedly resembles gunpowder, wired it to look like a bomb, and planted it on a shelf in the local Walmart. Then he made several calls to warn the store, but the employee who answered the phone dismissed him as a prankster. It wasn't until a customer spotted the device that the threat was taken seriously. By then, Kevin, Burnett, and Tom were long gone, with both Jeeps.
Are you saying he filled a container full of brake powder?
That's what he said. He filled it with brake powder.
Brake powder, like, this isn't something you put on your brakes. You don't powder your brakes. This is something that comes off your brakes,
That's what I thought.
Like, how do you get a whole cup of this stuff?
I don't know.
Like, you got some dirty-ass rims, homie. Like, how did you even do that?
But he designed it to make it look like a bomb, and the intention was to leave it on the shelf in the Walmart.
How much material do you need to make something look like a bomb?
He put it in a soda can.
Yeah.
Added some wires and duct tape.
You got a whole soda... Here's my problem. It's in a soda can. Like, how do you know what's in it? Then you took the time to fill it full of brake powder. Brake powder. Which
That's what it said.
Comes off of the brakes when you push on the brakes, right?
Yep.
That's not like a seasoning for brakes.
No.
It's not like something brakes snort at the club.
No, not that I'm aware of.
How do you even collect that?
I don't know.
How do you harvest all this brake powder?
They didn't go into that.
You got like a special brush and like a cup, or what are you doing?
They didn't go into all that, so I don't know. But what I can tell you is that his intention was to call in the bomb threat at the Walmart. All the police are going to report to the Walmart. They're going to go back to the car lot and steal the second car while the police were distracted. But since the Walmart person that answered the phone didn't believe them, it wasn't until much later that somebody found this device on a shelf and called the police. But by then, they had already just been like, F it, we're going to go steal the car and take our chances. They didn't keep the cars long. Instead, they took them joyriding through the woods, crashing into trees and playing bumper cars like it was a demolition derby. When they were done, Kevin soaked the interiors with smokeless powder and alcohol, lit a fuse, and watched them burn, hoping the fires would earn a mention on the evening news.
And if he already had all the smokeless powder, why wouldn't he put that where the brake dust is?
That was my question. And just weeks later, Kevin invited Chris and Pete out for an evening of good cheer. His version of it, anyway. It began with demolishing a parking meter and opening fire hydrants, a bit of low-grade mischief to get the night started, but it escalated quickly. The hydrant wrench, he hurled it straight through a high school auditorium window after using it to bash the payphone out in front of the school, rendering it inoperable. This will be important later. Then, it was on to car lots, smashing windows like it was a competitive sport. Street signs were stolen, bent, busted. Kevin was really rolling out the red carpet for his friends, pulling out all the stops to give them a night they wouldn't forget, and to cap it off, he defecated on a street sign and smashed it onto someone's windshield. Look.
What, was the street sign still on its pole?
No, I'm pretty sure he had to take it down to do that.
Because that'd be impressive.
Look, I don't care what kind of spiritual void you're filling in my soul. If you squat and go number 2 in front of me, I'm out. There's no bond. No bro code, no militia fantasy that justifies that level of commitment.
Oh, come on, man.
I'm out.
Sometimes you gotta go.
But Kevin wasn't done acting literally or figuratively. The boys hit up a construction site next, where they knocked over a porta potty and tried to set it on fire. Then they went and bought gasoline and doused the lumber pile at the construction site and lit that up too. They burned a cross in front of a church. They broke into a tractor-trailer parked outside a grocery store and attempted to ignite the bags of cornmeal and flour inside. This one fizzled. Impressive, really. I mean, flour is actually famously explosive, but not if you leave it neatly sealed inside the bag. They stole tools from a church's construction trailer and tried to torch that too. Another failure. But the most tragic crime of the night happened at a local restaurant. Outside, the restaurant kept 2 well-loved exotic birds in an enclosed hut. When the staff locked up and went home for the night, Kevin's crew set the enclosure on fire, killing both animals. Kevin hadn't even known what they were. He later told the others he thought he'd set a monkey cage on fire. His callous indifference to animals' suffering wasn't enough to scare the boys away. They were already too deep in the mission. And while all this mayhem may have been devilishly amusing fun to Kevin, minus the defecation for which there's just no excuse, it still didn't scratch the itch for attention, for outrage, and for infamy. Kevin Foster didn't just want to break the rules, he wanted to be remembered for it. Pete and Chris crashed at Kevin's place that night after their little acts of mayhem across Fort Myers. Somewhere in the afterglow of smashed glass, scorched jeeps, and felonies played off as fun, a name was born, the Lords of Chaos. Kevin had his crew, and now they had an identity. A few days later, with the whole gang assembled, Kevin laid out the official bylaws. No bragging, no talking about the group to outsiders, and betrayal or threat to the group would be punishable by death. Not just the traitor's death, but their entire family. There would be no dues, but they'd all chip in for gas. Meetings were set for Tuesdays and Thursdays, and any loot they pulled in from their missions would be split equally, and naturally, every good anarchist militia needs code names.
What? Well, how do you have an anarchist militia?
That's what they thought of themselves.
I once read in the Cynic's Dictionary that a nonconformist is really just a conformist with a relatively obscure role model. And I think that applies here.
Yeah.
I understand how you want to burn the world at that age, going through that experience with those friends and that environment. Like, I get that. I really do.
I think a lot of people can commiserate with that. I think
you're supposed to just like skip school and drink beer and shoot pool or something.
Yeah. And I think that discussing about where it went off the rails is important.
I do too, because you gotta have that thing in your head that says, don't hurt the monkey.
Burnett initially wanted to go by Red Dog, but Kevin insisted single words only.
He's nothing if not efficient.
So Burnett came Red, and his buddy Tom became Dog.
You had a bunch of words to choose from,
yeah.
But those two became the focus.
Derek Shields was dubbed Mob. Chris Black, the heavy-set computer geek, naturally went with Slim. And Pete got the head-scratcher of a nickname, Fried. Kevin, however, hadn't picked a name yet. That is until his loyal disciple Pete made a very on-brand suggestion. Why don't you go by God? And because nothing says totally stable human like adopting the name of the Almighty, Kevin embraced it. He would henceforth be known, at least among his misfit army, as God. And like his Old Testament namesake, Kevin was angry. Their so-called Night of Terror had made it into the local paper, but not in the way Kevin hoped. Instead of fear and reverence, a snarky columnist mocked them as pea-brained vandals and cretins with below-average intelligence.
I want to actually second that.
Kevin was incensed. He didn't want to be laughed at, he wanted to be feared. And honestly, I question the wisdom of a reporter who decides to troll a man that already proved he's not above dropping trowel and defecating on public property. Just saying, poke the psychopath with sharp words if you want to, but don't expect help getting the windshield wiper streaks off your car. And Kevin had a response for the newspaper. Not just a rebuttal, but a declaration. Because Kevin didn't just want revenge for being mocked, he wanted infamy. He had plans, big plans, explosive plans. But
they involved his butt.
But first, he had to make sure that the smug columnist knew that they were serious. So the Lords of Chaos did what any self-respecting anarchist militia would do. They sent the newspaper their manifesto. Not once to bury the lead, they titled it Declaration of War, Formal Introduction to the Lords of Chaos. And here's a direct quote from that letter. We are not playing anymore. Lee County is dealing with a formidable foe with high-caliber intelligence, balls of titanium alloy, and a wicked destructive streak.
And we can roll like a 21 with a double crit bonus.
Be prepared for destruction of biblical proportions, for this is the coming of a new God, whose fiery hand shall lay waste to the populace. The games have just begun, and terror shall ensue. End quote.
And then the Gorgon appeared.
While the others might have whooped and hollered at Kevin's unhinged bravado, his next move would drag all of them into a spiral they couldn't have imagined. None of the boys seemed to notice the important anniversary approaching, but Kevin did. April 19th, the anniversary of the Waco siege and the Oklahoma City bombing. Kevin intended to mark it with his own brand of destruction, just with
wet farts and disappointment.
Just with far less planning and a crew of high school kids. What could possibly go wrong? Well, we'll get into it next week on Crime to Burn. I'm not scornful. I'm thinking.
These are always sticky little wickets, potentially. Do you like long walks on the beach?
Probably, I guess.
Most firefighters do.
All right, you can't purr, though. Your microphone will pick it up.
I wasn't able to really refine the thing I was working on because I got distracted and started thinking about nature programs, and then I used up all my data.
She knows I'm a sucker.
It's amazing that I've never heard of any of these fires that you ever talk about. It's not going to take me any time at all to get lost. Because then you'll really be cool, finally.
I don't think I'm really destined for coolness.
You just need to emerge from your weird cocoon, whatever this is.
That's my security cocoon, my emotional support cocoon.
If your body splits open and something comes out of it, I'm just going to kill it. I'm not even going to ask questions. So don't emerge from any cocoons.
I meant like the climax of the story, not that kind of climax.
Well, I got to use words like climax. Sometimes on the weekend, you got to get down. I'm talking about the origin of the word candler, because it sounds like someone that's doing something with a candle. Well, this guy is clearly not from North Carolina. We don't even know how to spell. I don't want to be responsible for that kind of knowledge. You ever seen a wildebeest? Well, it was vibrating. I'm going to be looking at you with a little suspicion, though, every time you put your hands in your pocket now.
I think it's because we had to fight so hard for pockets, they gave them to us little by little.
Like being able to vote.
We should have asked for pockets first.
You've mutated into pocket people. That's a hot pocket. That's different.
You have an unsymmetrical pocket layout? Use the hook, Batman.
Look, lady, you don't just get to call me Batman. You can't unscrew something.
I think you can.
Have you heard that the Amazon trucks, when they go in reverse, it sounds like someone's murdering a goose.
I think you have overvalued your brainwaves.
I think you may have undervalued my billing rate. I don't care what you can do with your eyebrows. It doesn't affect my billing rate.
Are you trying to talk to me in Morse code?
Yeah.
I'm being distracted by my breath sounds.
Mitch McConnell? Mitch McConnell should not be normalized. No. You pronounce butt talks just like Forrest Gump.
Kevin Foster was a boy on the cusp of manhood. Brilliant, majestic. Nope, not majestic.
Look at him. He's so graceful.
It's magnetic.
You're on auctioneer speed today. People are going to think they got you on 1.5x. Hey, give me 5, give me 7, 5 numbers. And
He decided he wanted to be Jesus.
Yeah, you shouldn't find Jesus in the mirror. That's not the best place. I suggest your knees. When you always in the bathroom, no one can see you coming.
That was hurting you, wasn't it?
Yeah, okay. Man. Not only that.
It's entangled in a family tree with too many branches and not enough harmony. But for a while, he came off.
I thought you said that was called incest.
But he was living with 2 stepdads.
I hate myself right now.
They were birds, but he thought they were monkeys because he couldn't see them. He could only hear them. No.
At this point, Tyler Durden does not endorse your behavior, man. You're not burning random monkeys. That's the birds. Yeah. I'm not falling asleep or anything. I love the monkey. I just want to spank it and pet it, like in a good way, like in a way that it would like to be spanked,
Yep.
Consensual spanking.
We are not playing anymore. Lee County is dealing with a formidable foe with high caliber.
I'm not laughing at your mispronunciation at all.
Wait, it's going to get worse.
I'm laughing at the idea.
What do they call a catalyst that stops a reaction? Like,
I'm not a fucking nerd. I don't know.
You're an unerding agent.
An unnerding agent.
An innerding agent. Like
makes
you take something that's unstable and makes it more stable.
You approach me as a nerd, you leave enlightened.
Yeah, something like that.
But once you start hurting monkeys, man, you cross the fucking line. No one hurts a monkey on my watch. I can't wait to never talk about this ever again, but
I'm not down for the defecation problems.
I ain't never even been to Cleveland.
I know what that means now.
You're so adorable and wholesome. Because nature's ridiculous. My favorite creature may be the duck-billed platypus.
I just like saying tufted titmouse.
It's a mammal that lays eggs, that has no nipples, but still produces milk, and is venomous. And they're venomous, but they're only venomous in like their back legs, so they got a donkey kick you in the face.
Did you know wombats twerk other predators to death?
Yeah, I did, like in their holes or whatever, like against the wall.
I probably have a big enough ass to twerk somebody to death if I knew how to twerk.
Who's that stunt man with the big butt? I like that guy. He's got a special way of falling on his butt.
Oh, I know who you're talking about. I remember.
I feel like he could be a human wombat.
Oh, I wonder if he poops cubes.
He goes into the tunnel, destroys his enemy, eats them, and then shits them back out in cubes. That's how I'll always remember that guy.
I wonder if that's a baffling statement to everyone, or if everyone knows that wombats poop in cubes.
See, that's something I don't think a platypus can do, but I'm really not familiar enough with the defecation habits of the platypi. Bearings are sexy. You just haven't opened your mind enough. I'm trying to put the can opener of reality around your noggin. We're gonna open your mind, and you're gonna see things in a new way. This episode was brought to you by Teenaged Angst. Let's get a hold of that. I feel sorry for your keyboard. You just hurt that thing.
Pooping on a street sign does not make you a revolutionary. It makes you a biohazard.
It means you have really good balance.
Remember, civil disobedience shouldn't involve your bowels. This message brought to you by People for the Ethical Treatment of Municipal Infrastructure.
Before you defecate on a street sign to make a statement, ask yourself, is this the hill I want to poop on? Because vandalism is one thing, but gastrointestinal anarchy is forever. This message brought to you by the Department of Public Works and Regret. That was a nice noise. Yeah, I don't even feel my ass that I can't feel.
My ass is absolutely asleep.
I'm here against my will.
No, you're not.
Save me. Look at me blinking in Morse code.
They can't see you. We don't do video.
Hello, Twisted Humans. Do you find yourself wanting to know more about the latest murder, conspiracy, cult, or haunting? Then this is the podcast for you. I'm Alicia. And I'm Sierra, and this is Twisted and Uncorked.